So let's jump right in. I'm only going to show one slide, and I think the audience understands the disruptions, the challenges, the issues that we face in today's supply chain. As Kevin talked about, globalization isn't dead, but it's changing, and we as a practice need to be able to change with that. So I'd like to start with Marissa. When we were talking previously, you mentioned that in addition to your company facing these types of disruptions, you also have grown through merger and acquisition. So talk about how all that's played into the ability to address these disruptions, these changes that are necessary, in addition to growing through merger and acquisition.
Yeah, so I would say our merger and acquisition activity hasn't really changed our overarching strategy. We are FDA regulated, so any material changes that we make in our supply chain, there's a lot that goes in the background that has to happen for us to make changes. So really pivoting has been difficult, and so we need a lot of runway to be able to address some of the volatility in the market. But I would say one of the challenges from the M&A activity really comes around data and learning how we can integrate data from those companies that we've acquired into our ecosystem. And that takes quite a bit of work as well. So I think right now we're figuring out how to integrate them. What does the data mean? And how can we use that data to further refine our strategies moving forward?
Very good. I think, Joseph, you've been also experiencing that. Anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, so, sorry. So GPA Global started about 20 years ago. Two founders are still there. It's PE-backed, but two American guys started this in China, and they saw a market need. And so for the longest time, things that were, kind of manufactured in China, but they saw the writing on the wall and started acquiring a lot of other companies, a lot of M&A activity, and started acquiring companies in North America, Mexico, UK, Ireland. So again, data is always a challenge. I agree with you, Marissa, on that. I was their first CIO and trying to put together a whole ERP system there, and data is like, as we say, data is the new oil, right? But without good data, you can't get good feedback.
Excellent. Jim, anything you'd add? 'Cause I know you've also experienced that.
Yeah. I mean, so just to give you some sense of how much we've grown, it's pretty much been all by acquisition. We were a $3 billion company when I first joined in 2010. We're close to a $9 billion company today, so that's a lot of mergers and acquisitions. And different businesses, right? We're really in 3 different businesses. We're in office products business, we're in a paper distribution or paper packaging, wide format distribution business, and we're also in a global trade business. It's a balance between, from a systems perspective, right? I'll talk as a CIO for a second, and I'll get to the supply chain piece of this. You don't want to the same system is not necessarily right for everyone. And there's a lot of uniqueness, and our CEO's philosophy is very much let the presidents run their divisions, which makes a lot of sense. It provides the entrepreneurial incentive. It gives them real responsibility for the profits. The counter to that is, but when you want to gain synergies and you want divisions to work together, you've got to have a common way that you view the business. And a lot of this comes down to data architecture. And so it's not necessarily that you're doing things the same way, because that's not necessarily appropriate, but it's how do you view that information, and how do you make sure that when I call something an apple, right, everyone understands what an apple is, right? And they're not thinking about oranges or peaches or bananas, they're thinking about apples. That is hard. And it's hard not only within the enterprise, but also when you're talking outside the enterprise. And if you're in supply chain, more than half of your conversations are dealing with people that are outside of your company.
Very good. Daniel, I know you're recently new to Modine, but you've been in the supply chain space for some time. What are, in particular, as you think about the key challenges of supply chain, what are some of the challenges you've seen, and what have you seen are effective strategies or tactics to help manage those?
So I think everyone was reiterating it very well here. It's all about data. It's understanding the various components of data to start building models to be able to predict, which is a very difficult scenario today. When you're talking about the need to have common language across the business, we're going through a transformation effort to bring 40 manufacturing locations across the Americas, Asia, as well as Europe together on a common platform, that common platform being SAP. And that journey to a common data model is one of the key aspects for us to be able to predict and model how we need to organize our supply chain. as with every manufacturing company, we move things around frequently. We chase margins. We get closer to our products, closer to our suppliers. And in today's global economy, that is a challenge to be able to predict. But that one underlying theme that will help us get there is that understanding of the data, having all of the key components of the data. If you look at just some of the recent tariffs that come out, you have to consider not just where products come to you, but also what makes up your products. Those small portions of a raw material into an overall product that you deliver to a customer, all those little minute details of what makes up a product is key to understanding where you need to go, and ultimately how can you predict what you need to do for the future.
Very good, thank you. Marissa, from an Alcon perspective, how has the company been balancing the need for global scale, global sourcing, global distribution with the move towards regionalization and even in some cases nearshoring or reshoring, friendly shoring? What are some of the things you've witnessed and what are some of the things you've seen Alcon do to help address that?
Yeah, I think we're probably ahead of the times on this one. We have a very vast footprint across the globe. And I think what we've been able to do is when we are experiencing issues in a particular geography, we've been able to shift that manufacturing for those particular products to other sites within our ecosystem. So I think we have always had a really robust contingency plan, whether it's due to the impacts of tariffs, whether it's geopolitical tensions. We've always had a very strong kind of risk management, risk mitigation team. And so it's been a fairly smooth pivot that we've had to make in the cases where we've had to make it.
Excellent. Anyone else want to add to that?
Yeah, I think, somebody said yesterday, never waste a good tragedy, right? And so I think COVID kind of woke a lot of people up, and we had a lot of supply chain issues, a lot of ships that were being backed up and not allowed into the ports. And so I think, what GPA, I think, has done well is really start nearshoring and manufacturing globally. They moved their headquarters to the U.S. A lot of the customers actually demand this nearshoring. So you have large companies like Diageo or L'Oreal, and they don't want to deal with these supply chain concerns, and it's more sustainable to do it closer, right, rather than shipping it all the way from China. So there was an intentional move. There's still some stuff made in China, but intentional move towards nearshoring. And in fact, I think with the tariffs now, it's even pulling things back into the U.S. So there are some plants in the U.S. that were commissioned to go away that are now being reopened, and stuff from Mexico is coming up to the U.S. now.
Thank you. We're almost 15 minutes into this panel and nobody's mentioned AI yet. So I think we do win a prize.
Do we get a prize for that?
We get a prize for that, yes. Yeah. You get a massage outside afterwards. Jim, talk a little bit about technology. What's the role in technology in helping us with all this disruption? The things that you see are helping manage it and not just survive, but actually thrive.
Yeah, I mean, it's really about information, right? I mean, when something gets disrupted somewhere in the world, and believe me, we've seen that over the last 5 years, right? Since the COVID pandemic, since a lot of the supply chain disruptions we've seen, we basically, it's really hard to use the Suez Canal anymore between ships that have gotten stuck in it 2 years ago to now the geopolitical tensions. You can't ship that way. How do you get that information on a timely basis so that then not only can you make the best decisions about where you're going to get your products from and how you're going to source them, et cetera, but communicate that to your customers to say, look, I can get you this product, but here's the time frame I can get it for you in, and here's the cost of what that's going to cost. And you've got to have transparent communications. That is not possible without technology. And it's not just the ability to convey the information, but to convey the meaningful information. And I think I mentioned this when I opened up. Convey the information in a way that your customers understand it. So get it from your suppliers or from your service providers or your partners, whatever. Put that into a format that you can use in your company, and then put that in a format that your customers can understand so that they can say, okay, now I understand what this means to me. That's difficult, but that's what we're trying to do with technology from a supply chain perspective. If you can get that right, your customers are happy, your suppliers are happy, and you make your job a lot easier.
Daniel, as a supply chain leader, how do you look at technology?
So most of us from a manufacturing background, we always look at ERP. ERP kind of runs the foundation of a large organization. And for you, those of you in the SAP world, it's very slow. You can't run at the speed of ERP today. You have to look at the edge of ERP. And what I mean by that is the bolting on of specific applications to help you run faster. We're a diversified industrial. We move companies in, we move companies out, and we have to be able to move more rapidly than we could within ERP. Think of just market segmentation as we move businesses around under the same portfolio. That you can't do as quick in ERP. We're starting to have to look at things that surround ERP at the edge, looking at things that can help us forecast better. What if I can start looking at my products that are make-to-stock style in our inventory, bringing some AI technology that looks at other trends, looks at weather analysis so that I can better forecast demand and build a supply chain around that. Overall, if I moved at the speed of ERP, our business would slow down to a crawl. It's really getting outside of the edges of ERP, looking at data, and bringing in technology that can't necessarily sit at the core of your back office.
Thank you. Marissa, you mentioned earlier that you're a part of a highly regulated industry, obviously. How has regulation and customer expectations affected how you address resiliency, transparency, and making sure that all of this is balanced?
I think it impacts everything that we do as far as what's on the table, right? So I think there are a multitude of strategies that you can deploy to help navigate the environment that we're in right now. Some of them we are able to move forward with relatively quickly, and some of them we're not. So again, from a manufacturing standpoint, externally, we are really restricted as to where we can make our products, where we can source the components for our products. But where we do have more flexibility, we are definitely hyper-focused, and there's a much greater sense of urgency around identifying where we have high risk for critical components that we need to make our products. So we have, speaking of technology, we are very knee-deep into where can we employ or deploy technology to help us get the information that we need, synthesize, digest that information, and to make objective and fact-based decisions. So everything from mapping our supplier ecosystem, so not just our tier one, but all levels of our supplier base, strategic inventory management, right? We are moving toward real-time tracking of our inventory, particularly for our high-risk components. So anywhere where we can identify a strong use case and we can implement the technology to help us get ahead of that, because time is always our biggest enemy, we are absolutely interested in that and employing it where we can.
Excellent. And Joseph, you mentioned too, regulations play a big part in your industries.
Yeah, they do. I mean, obviously, when you're doing global, especially in Europe, you have GDPR you have to worry about. So, you're one of the first things I did when I came in as a CIO is start training everybody on cybersecurity. 90% of the breaches are done because somebody clicked on the wrong stuff, right? So the absolute first thing I did is make sure people knew what spam was, or phishing emails, right, and what to click and not to click. But yeah, there's always a concern with that GDPR data. We're not healthcare, so it's not that strict, but it's still GDPR can be pretty serious. But on the technology side, I think one thing Jim said earlier, yes, get people on the same system, but we had a hybrid approach. So there were a lot of disparate ERP systems across the 12 or 13 companies that were acquired. But the manufacturing systems were legacy and they were good. So we didn't replace the manufacturing stuff. We basically said we're going to put an ERP system in for all the financials. It took over 25 days to close the books because they just didn't have the data. And so just doing that, gets everybody on the same financial systems and supply chain, the master data management, an apple is an apple, not an orange. And it sounds easy, but it's not. Yeah. So, but I love what Philip said yesterday. He said, if you have bad data, you're going to get bad decisions. And so I think as people jump into this AI thing, we learned yesterday there's incremental AI and then there's disruptive AI. Incremental AI is not as dangerous, right? You can start automating some stuff if you have the right data. but be careful what you do with AI if you don't have the right data.
Jim, your company, where are you on your AI journey as it pertains to supply chain? And are there any use cases that you've seen so far that have been particularly beneficial for your company?
Sure. I mean, so where I'd say probably the second stage of the process, I'd say the first stage is just planning and just figuring out, what do we mean by AI, kind of putting together a little bit of an architecture of, how does AI fit in with other levels of automation, right? So I think we've all dealt with RPA, we've all dealt with little AI and machine learning, and then generative AI. And not everything has to be generative AI, right? And I think that's part of an education process. We've talked across all of our divisions about that. The second is finding out a couple of key use cases, and I wouldn't call them necessarily transformative, but they can have big impacts. So two of the use cases we're looking at right now. One is very straightforward, kind of document management, and I'll talk about supply chain documents, pulling in the documents you get, and for any of you who work in supply chain, the documents you get are in every format, between scratches on yellow sheets of paper to EDI transactions that are coming in. How do you pull all that together to what you need inside your systems, whether it's your ERP systems or some of your logistics management systems, et cetera? We're starting to use AI to do that, to interpret those documents and pull out the key pieces of information. And that's a very focused case, but it does have a lot of impact. The second, and this is a little more transformative, is looking at how we price our products. And this is not so much supply chain related, but taking a look at the margins we get on each order and the margins we get for certain products and saying, are we truly optimizing that? And it's a discussion. We have our sales team involved in it, and they're actually very supportive of this because we sell so many products that none of your salesman is an expert on every product they sell, believe it or not. And they'll actually admit that, which is great. So the question is, for the products that they're not the experts on in particular, they're very open to that kind of analysis, and it helps them essentially make more money, and it helps us make more money. So those are kind of the more interesting AI projects we have going on. We have a few other pinpointed projects. We also have designed an architecture and selected the base tools that we're going to use for various levels of AI. Not that we're locked into those, because we'll use alternate ones where it makes sense, but at least we have somewhere to go, so that if you want to do something, you've at least got a default group of tools you can go to. And then if you think something else is better, that's great. Bring it to the team and we'll figure it out.
Great, thank you. Daniel, same question to you. Where are you in your journey, and what are some of the use cases you've seen beneficial?
So as you mentioned, I'm 6 to 7 months into a new role here. So brand new. When I got into the role, we had a culture of controlling nature within the IT organization. We wanted to control every aspect of technology throughout the corporation, which just made us ridiculously slow. And it drove things like shadow IT, a bad word in all of our views. We're rebooting our strategy quite drastically. And that strategy is really to push innovation beyond the boundaries of IT, to institute risk-weighted guardrails for the exploitation of technology. So our first step in that is to start building a data analytics strategy that allows us to get access to data. We have many disparate ERP systems, many systems that sit on manufacturing floors, just creation of numerous storages of where data exists. Our first step is to bring that into a central location that we can start exploiting, and exploiting beyond the boundaries of IT, meaning that it doesn't require somebody in IT to go write you a report. It requires you to understand data and get access through the technology tools that we put in place. The second piece of that is the creation of platforms that can be iterated on top of, and platforms that, again, don't require an IT technologist to take advantage, but a technologist that sits somewhere at the edge of the business where we can actually drive value from these platforms. And that platform will be allowing us to, and we're looking at a couple different partners at the moment, but a platform for people to innovate on top of and take advantage of point scenarios that are on the edge of ERP to exploit for a very specific business process that IT doesn't necessarily understand how to solve. We just understand the technology and how we can bring those enabling components.
Excellent. I'll throw it to you too, Melissa. Where's Alcon on its journey, and what are some of the use cases you've seen?
We're still fairly early in our journey. We are primarily focusing on governance, first and foremost, again, highly regulated industry, and then also on building out our strategy, so working with some strategic partners on building that out as well. I think we have primarily focused our AI efforts internally, more along the lines of kind of employee or team member productivity. And we're really just venturing out and exploring use cases on how we can use it outwardly facing within our entire supply chain, from R&D to manufacturing to eventual sales. So still early in the process, but things are changing so rapidly. I think we can let some other folks be guinea pigs to figure out what works and what doesn't.
Great. Joseph, how about you?
Yeah, before I left, we were, dipping our toes in the water. And you say shadow IT, I call it shadow AI now because, you got to worry about security and open source there. But we were working with Azure AI, and we were piloting Copilot, no pun intended. Like I said, incremental stuff. But with the Azure AI, we created some AI bots on a homegrown application called PDM, it's Product Development Management. And it actually helped the users speed up how they're working with the customer, getting bill of materials together quicker, understanding machine capabilities, and what machines were the best ones to use for that product. And so that process was starting to shrink in terms of timeline. And then they also we do a lot of sampling, right, with our customers. So using AI and digital to do digital sampling, rather than creating the sample itself. So again, trying to be more sustainable and quicker. And so these were, the CEO is very much into AI, and I think it goes top down. I know there's not a CEO out here who doesn't want to use AI, right? But they don't know how.
You mentioned sustainability, and I know with all the disruptions we're seeing in the supply chain, maybe sustainability, green supply chains, even circular economies, those things may be taking a back seat. What's been your experience? Jim, you want to address that?
Well, first of all, it comes back to the regulations, right? I don't know whether you're following some of the regulations that are going on, particularly from the European Union, but there's a lot of regulations around sustainability. So one of the things that we're facing, so we deal in the paper industry, and actually a lot of the paper manufacturers are actually very concerned about sustainability. They actually want to sustain it. That's not true globally, and I can certainly point to some areas in the world where they definitely don't have sustainable practices, and so can the European Union. And so the European Union has added regulations that require you to say, where did the pulp that went into making the paper, that went into the books that you're importing into the European Union come from? Well, if you know anything about the book printing industry or the paper manufacturing industry, that is really difficult to do, and it requires really complex supply chain systems and data in order for you to actually say the trees that went into making this book came from this area of the world. Well, that's exactly what we have to do now. And if you want to import things into Europe, that's what you have to do. So it falls on the manufacturers, it falls on the printers, it falls on the book publishers to do that. We're kind of in the center of that because of what we do, because we not only do we buy and sell pulp, but we buy and sell paper. So we have to carry that information with us, and a lot of those groups are looking to us for some guidance for that, on how do we do that, and how can you guys support us in it, particularly for the folks that are closer to the customer. So sustainability is something that we will all need to be concerned about, right? There's other sustainability issues too, like when you're shipping goods from China, and you were normally going to go through the Suez Canal, well, you're not doing that anymore for a lot of things, right? You just can't, right? So you're burning more fuel. What does that mean? It's not just what it means from a cost and efficiency perspective, but what does that mean from a sustainability perspective? So these are all concerns that we have to monitor and we have to manage, because all the folks that rely on us, want to know about this information and expect us to be helping them manage it.
I'll throw it to the rest of the panel. Anything you want to add to that on sustainability, green supply chains, or circular?
Yeah, just what I mentioned earlier, like the nearshoring, right? So you're saving a lot of fuel if you're able to get things done right over. Well, let's say prior to tariffs, it was right over the border in Mexico. Your traveling is a lot less, but I think that's really important. GPA actually stands for Green Packaging Asia. So sustainability is in their name, and they're trying as much as you can. You're making paper and wood products, right? So
we have a few minutes left. Put your prognostication hats on. and think about the future, where do you see, or maybe even where do you feel the disruptions are going to keep you awake at night? Marissa, let's start with that.
I think we're already there.
You're not sleeping well now.
I think what keeps all of us up at night is just the uncertainty. I think we used to feel a lot more confident in our predictive analytics. There are just so many X factors that we did not have to account for in the past, and I think we're all kind of watching this show and seeing what's going to happen in the next episode, and so we're really testing our level of adaptability, collaboration, and innovation, right, to figure out how we're going to come out on top here. I think anybody would be disingenuous to say otherwise. But
Joseph, from your perspective.
Yeah, so the only constant in business is change, right? And change is happening more rapidly now, more than ever before. So I think it's really just keeping up, and you know, people say AI is the future. No, AI is now, and if you're not doing something now with it, you're going to get left behind. So I think it's, you know, how do we do this in a secure, safe way? We don't want our data to go out there in open source somewhere, but also you can't wait any longer. You gotta move on it now.
Excellent. Jim?
Well, first of all, for our business, I'll say this a little strongly, but we like disruption, right? Why? Because we're in the middle, and the only reason that we're needed there is because of the complexities that are being added, you know, for whether it's pulp manufacturers or paper manufacturers or printers or whatever. So, but our value proposition to our customers is we handle that complexity. Well, as the data becomes more available, you know, it's going to be incumbent on us to make sure that we're managing those supply chains, making those real-time decisions to give our customers the best service possible and the best products at the best price, and make those decisions quickly and transparently. And this gets back to what I said, you know, originally here. That's what we're doing. So we need to look at when the disruptions change your source of supply, because you can't get the product at the right price anymore from a certain place, or you can't get it at all in some cases, or change the way that product needs to get to the customer through supply chain disruptions. We have to be ready to make that decision at that point and tell our customer, hey, even though I said I was going to do this, I'm going to do this because now I have a better way to deliver that to you.
Daniel, same question.
So I think I'd echo all the comments here, but I would add to it. In the keynote this morning, we heard globalization is not going to stop. And with that globalization comes a speed and velocity that we're just not used to in the IT world. And we have to think about that technology is going to move at a faster pace than we can control within the boundaries of IT. And it's about putting in the right governance and risk management to be able to bring this technology at the speed of this globalization, the speed of what your business operates at. And that brings a new challenge to an IT organization that hasn't previously existed. You can't control every piece of technology, but you can put the right controls around it to minimize that risk. And trying to operate at that speed is a challenge. It's a challenge that keeps me up at night, and it's a challenge that we all have to overcome.
Thank you. Just have a minute left. I guess just one thing I would put in. We haven't talked much about people and the skills and everything necessary in supply chain today. And just, you know, from my standpoint, I've had the pleasure of being in supply chain now for almost 30 years. I hate to say it's been that long. And you said yesterday, every year of supply chain is 10 years on your life. So that makes me about 290 years old. But what's interesting is, you know, 30 years ago, supply chain was all about cost reduction, taking cost out of the supply chain, sourcing better, managing categories, distribution mechanisms, keeping your inventories low in your warehouse, delivering just in time, or having the on time in full. And what I see now is our supply chain leaders, they need to be risk managers like a lawyer. They need to be technologists like a CIO. They need to be, you talked about taking quick decisions. They need to be like a plant manager, making, you know, real-time decisions. So it's interesting to see how the skill set necessary for a supply chain professional has changed. I guess just really quickly down the line, anything else you would add to that from a skills capabilities standpoint? Marissa?
no, I think you hit the nail on the head. I think that all of those different skill sets are converging into what is needed to be a successful supply chain professional, because there's so many different moving parts. Like, I'm a procurement professional, I'm also a lawyer. So again, a really good example of what you just said, and having someone who is also really good with the data has become a critical component. We now have data analytics teams within our supply chain. I wouldn't think of how we would be able to operate effectively without them. So yeah, it seems the chasm is widening as to the skills that we need and what we don't need anymore, and refocusing folks on those more value-added and strategic positions within the organization.
Excellent, thank you. Well, we're over time. I really appreciate my panelists. Thank you to the audience for joining us today, and we look forward to the rest of the conference.
Thank you.
Yeah.